Okay, I can't see you in Zoom yet.
Oh, I probably need to click. Where's the? There we go.
Okay, first of all, FYI, Justin mentioned, apparently your recording process is creating gaps in your audio. There's something wrong there.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at my Skype. My OBS that's recording. What do you call it? And if you talk, you can see like on my screen, the top one is
Yeah.
moving, which is not right. It should be the bottom one.
Testing, testing.
Yeah, it's like it's oh, it's got both apparently. That's not what. Okay, so this should sorry,
Test.
speak again for a tick. So
Testing.
that's better.
Okay, test.
Yeah, and it's not doing the other one. So yeah, the gaps in the audio, I mean, I've got like a hard switch. So if I do that, then the signal will drop to 0. I don't know if that was he mentioned it but I didn't know if that was a timestamp thing or what. Sorry, I didn't know what the cause was, and I didn't have a timestamp to check.
Oh, yeah. Ask him. He can find a timestamp. He had some examples he found.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah. And our tutorial will get uploaded after Justin finishes stitching the audio back together.
Yep. Cool. Oh, was that in the previous audio just for the other one, not for 16 but for 15?
Yeah, he was looking at the previous one where I had audio problems on the first half.
Okay, that might have been I just used VLC to extract it. So I'm not sure if that is like not the best way of doing it. It was just super convenient.
If you get a timestamp, you can check and then see if it actually is correct in the original or not.
Yep. I can do another export.
Okay, so a few things. I guess first of all, how come you're missing sleep? Do you have any idea?
Oh yeah, because I'm going to sleep late. That's not obviously a great explanation.
Yeah.
I'm like
are you having trouble getting to sleep, or is it like a choice where you could have just gone to bed earlier?
No, it's a choice.
Okay. So what are you doing or prioritizing?
The I don't know what to sort of call it, the procrastination / avoidance thing. Like as in I'm yeah, like binging stuff. And avoiding
Like games and videos?
Mostly games, yeah. A few videos, but not actually that's probably dropped off relative to the normal amount of stuff that I watch. Yeah, no games particularly.
Okay.
I was sort of like I was sort of conscious of like trying not to force myself to do stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I don't know, I guess I sort of sounds weird to say, but like didn't resist as such.
Yeah. So did you do any of the stuff we talked about, like paying more attention to what it's like when you play the game and trying to understand what you like about it?
Yeah, so that was I guess so I don't know, not main reason or main thing or whatever else, but I did try to do that at least. There's a few things that I noticed. So one of them is that when I'm doing this, there's a usually there's some kind of like goal or point or whatever else that I'm like determined to get to. Um, so like sometimes like it's been in the past like a particular level or location or things. Um,
Right.
uh, yeah, sometimes it's just finishing the game, not in a speedrunning sense, but just in a like go explore the or experience this narrative sort of sense, something more like that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And do you have
Uh,
any idea what's fun or appealing about that? Like, do you tell people like, oh, I got to level 60, um, to like brag about it or to keep up with your friends or something like that?
uh, no, no, not really. Like sometimes I'll discuss it with one or two people, but not in a like bragging sort of sense. I mean, usually I'm like kind of embarrassed about doing it because I've, you know, sort of over prioritized whatever it is this thing was. Um, Usually it's they're often like pretty arbitrary goals as well. Like one of the things that I did earlier this year was in the latest Pokemon games, like completed the Pokedex, which is a massive waste of time. Um, anyway, there was one person that I was discussing that with, but I didn't really talk to anyone else about it. My sort of idea about this is that it's related in some way to. So there's a few things sort of at play, but one of them is related to like an achievement sort of thing, or like one of the things in common about all the activities I choose at that point, all the games are they're not things that you can really fail at. Um, the one exception is maybe Age of Empires 2. Um, but that was maybe a bit different. Um, anyway, yeah. So it's like a time sink. It's very low, sort of like brain energy. They're always pretty easy as such. It's not to say that I don't like enjoy something that has like a difficulty to it. I don't set it to the easiest difficulty, but yeah, but it's stuff that anyone given enough time would do or would be able to complete. Um, so
You'd be surprised, maybe not anyone, but I get your point.
um, the well, it's definitely something that I can't fail at. Um,
Right, right.
if I were going to, I would just reduce the difficulty at that point. Um, so uh, yeah, usually it's like around getting to some sort of goal that I've got in my head. Um, a few years ago, I played World of Warcraft, like PvE, just doing quests up till about I think it was level 65 or so, but it was oh no, it might have been a bit less in the mid 50s. Anyway, but it was around getting to the Ungoro crater, particularly was what I had in mind starting it, and then I lost all interest once I got there. Um, with like this thing at the moment, so for example, like playing Fallout 4, um, the so it's a game that I've played like plenty in the past, um, but like part of it feels like a uh, sort of like getting like ticking things off a list type thing. Um,
Uh-huh.
so there's obviously lots of small like achievements in that every quest is some kind or completing that you get like the nice little yay XP thing. Um, yeah. So one of the uh like ideas about why like it might maybe there's a thing to do with like a sense of not achieving things in other like in the other stuff that I'm doing in my life, and therefore like combined with sort of a bit of burnout sort of stuff, it is a way to like both rest and then have some sort of sense of completing something.
Yep.
Um,
Did you see my
yeah.
screen? That's what I was thinking of. Is
Okay.
it
Yeah.
sounds like maybe completing goals feels good to you. And Do you think you might have a shortage of that in other stuff you do?
Um, yeah, in that like a lot of the stuff, like work is typically longer projects and things, right? Or bigger projects.
Right. More
Um,
open-ended as well, probably, instead of
yeah.
like clear milestones.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I haven't like done full-time work for like some months now, but before that, it was definitely a like the last sort of like 8 months sort of project or whatever else. Definitely had problems with uh like achieving things, um,
Yeah.
in the way that corporate stuff often does. Um, the other big thing in my life obviously is Flux, which is incredibly open-ended and usually lacks like often you'll like do an election or something, but obviously we don't win. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, there's sort of like, and there is stuff that we achieve, and it feels good to get it done, sort of thing. But it's not the same as winning would feel or whatever else. Um, yeah, so in both of those areas, like things are very open-ended and without sort of like often without completions or things. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So one of the problems people have when they're not completing clear goals is it becomes harder for them to tell how much progress they're making and how successful they're being. So people lose objectivity about their progress and success when they don't have um, so you can be a bit lost and you don't know if you're going in the right direction sometimes, or it seems like the right direction, but you don't know how fast you're going or like how much further until you get there. And stuff like that can be really discouraging because, yeah, the lack of clear feedback that you're doing the right things and the lack of clarity about when you will get what rewards or anything like that.
yeah,
Yeah, so games are good at going the other direction and giving frequent feedback and sub goals and so on.
yeah, yeah. And I guess that's sort of yeah. There, like one of the things that I notice is there's so on the short term, there's a like just finish this next thing uh sort of idea going on, and then on the longer term, it's like I don't want to start focusing on new things until I've like finished the bigger sort of thing. So I like avoid stuff, and then try and pour even more energy into like the game to get to X point or whatever else. Um, there's also I think some elements of I mean I don't like the term self-sabotage because I think it's really easy to misuse, but or not even to anyway, I don't like the term, but the like the staying up late thing is it makes me less capable of doing the other stuff. So I feel like I have more of an excuse. And because I can do the game thing tired, um, it like doesn't affect that too much.
Yeah, I did something similar in high school. I stayed up late a lot, and then it was easier to not pay attention during school. Instead of like if you're fully awake and you're bored, that's kind of shitty.
It's well, yeah, it's sort of worse. Um, yeah.
Okay, so do you think that you need more structured goals for working on philosophy related things? Do you think that might be one of the main issues?
I think that would probably help. In terms of reflecting on the things that we're doing so far, if like, and I guess sort of like measuring against the goals that I've got in my head, So I haven't actually, I've got just find my goal tree thing that I did, if I can. So like this was the original sort of thing. There is sort of like some, so I guess one of the things is a lot of the goals feel sort of semi-complete but unresolved a bit. Like in
Uh-huh.
terms of um, like the grammar article on FI, like I've done all the exercises, we've gone through all the material. I guess I didn't really, like, there's no feeling coming to mind about like completing that. And then we've got, this sort of more grammar stuff. Some of the more grammar stuff feels a bit unstructured to me in that I don't have a clear sort of structure or idea of that in my head. There's stuff like the structuring of ideas I think has like definitely been helpful. But again, it's sort of there's no clear completion sort of criteria for that either. Or I mean, not that there's incomplete or unclear stuff with
Yeah.
the grammar article itself, but yeah. Um,
That's one of the things that's difficult about philosophy in general.
mm,
It's a soft discipline rather than like the hard sciences. You're not doing math, you're not doing formal logic. Um, you're thinking about ideas and explanations and arguments, and it is harder to measure things and be rigorous. And be objective. People have a harder time figuring out when they're wrong and when they're thinking objectively or not.
yep, yep,
And it's fairly open-ended where you can always learn more stuff. And there are many little sub-goals which you can identify. For example, every part of speech is a sub-goal. If you understand nouns well, then that's one of the goals. Verbs is another goal. Linking verbs, that's a goal, etc. You can take each of those things and add up your progress that way. Each of those things is semi-open-ended because you can get an initial understanding of linking verbs, and then later you could revisit it and get a better understanding. So it's not like closed in a final way, but get an initial understanding is a goal, get a revised understanding is a goal, and so on. Usually when you revise, at least after the first couple of times, it's because there's a specific problem, like you're having a writing problem or you're not able to understand a certain sentence or something. So then you can make the goal be um, update my understanding of this topic enough that I can figure out how that sentence works or write this article or whatever.
yep, yeah. Um, I guess like yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about the grammar stuff and whether it's like I don't know. I guess why didn't it feel particularly fulfilling to me? It does like it's odd in that um I sort of recognize its impact in that I'm thinking about the structures of sentences like in general conversation and stuff. Um,
Yep,
Now where if I did that before, it was sort of the talking with a
more
friend
ad
and
hoc and
intellectualizing type
intuitive.
thing. Yeah, and it wasn't like it wasn't just like background stuff that I was doing all the time. Um,
Yeah, grammar gives a new perspective on reading and analysis. Lets you see the world in a different way.
which I'm so it's yeah, sorry, it's just odd in that it's like things feel different. I know things are practically different, but it doesn't like have this like an associated sense of completing something.
Right. I think it's similar with trees, where there's clear progress. You've figured out some things about how to use them, but it's also somewhat open-ended. You could learn more about trees.
Yep.
So part of why people find things unfulfilling is they have trouble with choose your own adventure goals, where you're making up your own goals instead of using standardized goals shared by many other people. There
Yep.
are many types of social support for standard goals. Other people understand them and approve of them and make educational resources for them and can error check you and judge whether you succeeded at the goal or not. You can go find an existing expert to check your work. Whereas if you're doing your own goals, you end up more with concerns that it's all in your head and a bit arbitrary, and it's harder to be confident.
Mm.
You have fewer like ways that it's entangled with the rest of society and the rest of your knowledge to let you double check everything
Yep.
and get reminders about it as a common thing with more socially standard things. Is that it comes up, other people bring it up sometimes, so you get reminders.
Yeah.
Grammar is actually like a standard thing in that there are a decent number of people who are already good at it, and there are educational resources for it and so on. But it is it's not respected that much, even among writers, I think. It's seen as something you just like learn in grade school and then you're done with it, rather
Yeah.
than something that like everyone who's an aspiring writer should actually be studying a bit more.
It feels like there's a condescension towards basic stuff. Um,
Yeah,
like
and the educational resources for grammar are primarily aimed at students.
yep, yep. Either
Um,
young kids
mo
for English speakers or English as a second language type stuff.
yeah, but I think Peikoff's course is not like that. I didn't come off as condescending to me or anything, and it seemed aimed at like 30-year-olds, kind of.
Yep. Yep. So I haven't actually even like I think some years ago I opened that and started listening to the audio, but I haven't revisited that since then.
Yeah, so there's some stuff. There's also he recommends an old grammar book, so it has a different style and feel to it than the modern resources.
Um, that's not the elements of style, is it?
No.
No, okay. Because I know that's quite old or whatever, but gets thrown around. Just while you bring that up, I'm just going to grab a jacket. Cool. Um, okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar
Yeah.
with it.
I'm pretty sure this is the book, except it was probably an older edition. This says expanded. Um, so yeah, older resources can have a different feel that you might appreciate. There are some upsides to them compared to modern education, so that might help. Another thing you can do is use practice questions. So if you go to like ixl.com, for example, you can get a lot of worksheets. So we go to grade 9 English, for example, and we have like nouns and pronouns and prefixes and suffixes and so on. And so let's click on nouns. Form and use plurals, review. Complete the sentence with a correct plural. The proof from book spread just arrived. She now has 6 weeks to select her other favorites. This is actually
Oh,
really
the
confusing. Are you supposed to pick singular or plural? Because it says correct plural, so it sounds like it's supposed to be plural.
I think it's
But anyways, they have
proofs,
a bunch
like,
of,
but yeah,
yeah, I don't even know what they want.
I often,
I
yeah,
guess
try
it's
in the first
proofs.
few, yeah,
Uh,
okay, yeah.
Attorneys. Yeah, okay. Anyways, that one seems a little easy, but they have many, many different worksheets. So you can find some that are harder, but it gives you like a structured goal kind of thing where, answer the questions, get a score, get your score up to 100 to master the material, or like they have 90 is pretty good, and then you have to get 10 in a row right to get to 100, which is actually kind of a dumb system, but
I think, yeah, the Khan Academy has something similar. The idea is around mastering a topic as opposed to completing coursework and then being done with it type thing. Um, it seems at least better than the typical school stuff of here's a worksheet, once you're done with it, we're moving on.
yeah. Right, so you can get structured practice with goals. If you just go find them online, they definitely have grammar quizzes and so on. Oh, drop the CA dot from the URL. Or
Oh,
I
okay,
wonder
yeah.
if they have an Australian version. I don't know if there's an Australian. Oh,
Yeah, no, it
AU.
redirects
Yeah,
to au.ixl.com.
there you go.
Yep, cool. Oh, I wonder if it's no, okay, no. If I go to U9 English, it looks like it's the same stuff. It's not country specific. Cool.
They do have country
Um,
variations. The US has extra stuff like science and social studies that not all countries have. So, but I think English and math are the most standard, so you'll probably be fine without having to go to the US one.
um, yeah, it looks like I just get options for English and maths.
Yeah,
And there's a tab on mine called National Curriculum, which is a term in what do you call it? Like it was a policy introduced about 10 years ago. Yeah, and it's got provincial curriculum in the Canadian one.
yeah.
I don't.
IXL's pretty big. They have a localization budget and stuff.
Yeah, okay. Yep. That makes sense. There is so in the Canadian one there's maths, calculus, and English in grade 12. I think in the Australian one it is just maths and English. So but there's more skills, so it's split up differently. So yeah, so there is localization stuff, but that's fine.
Right now I'm getting directed to the Australian one. I just wanted to go to the US one. Oh well. Oh, United States. You can pick it on purpose in a little drop down.
That's decent UI,
Yeah,
I
see,
guess.
they have
Yeah,
science
yep,
and social studies on US. They also have Spanish.
yep. Okay, so I could I could find some stuff to do more or to find some more structured goals, which is probably actually just thinking about it as well, is one of the things I was thinking about with the grammar was like there were a few things that I would get stuck on repeatedly. Um, so yeah, like a few anyway, yeah. We covered a few of them, but
Yeah,
probably helps with that sort of stuff as well, in that it's much nicer than like yeah, a PDF type thing or where you copy paste it into a markdown document and like add answers in and stuff like that when you get feedback straight away from the app.
yeah. So being able to find your own resources and use them is a very important skill for self-learning, like not in a course. So like for all sorts of things you learn in life, being able to look them up yourself, find multiple resources, multiple sources, like skim them, see which ones you think are good, compare them when there's confusing parts, etc. Those kinds of learning skills are really valuable across fields, especially for less structured fields like English language stuff instead of math and mathy stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
That's
those
been
are good things to practice and look into, and so it's a dual purpose thing if you're practicing grammar, but also practicing uh, finding resources on your own and figuring out which ones work for you.
yeah, yep. It's probably a thing as well that I haven't practiced as much in the sense that um, I mean, I've done plenty of that with coding, but that's
Yeah.
sort of pretty easy by comparison.
A lot of people have trouble with it, so I think that's a real skill to be actually able to do that effectively. Like, part
Um,
of why people do coding boot camps is they have trouble self-directing themselves to go look things up and so on.
yeah, so what I was thinking was that it's because I've always been very good at maths. Um, and so it's been very easy to meet sets of structured goals. Um, and particularly
Uh-huh.
as well, the uh, the problems I usually use if I'm trying to learn a language and I'm just interested in doing exercises. Um, so I mean here, like we can see, like this is like I created an account just for practicing Haskell stuff some years ago. Um, but these are all maths problems.
Yeah,
Like
I've done like 50 project dealer problems. They get pretty hard after the first group.
they're yeah, I find them like really really fun. Um, which is one of the reasons. I mean, I stopped doing that because uh I don't know what um yeah. So my main one I've done yeah like 63 of them. Um, but that's sort of I mean they're also really really rewarding in the sense that usually there's things that you've got to sort of figure out. I mean, some of them you can just sort of do because of the stuff you've done before, but other ones you've got to actually try and figure things out, and you run into problems where it worked for low numbers, but it doesn't work for big numbers the previous way you did it. And so it's quite a yeah, but it has it's quite a rewarding sort of thing, but it has this big uh like presumption that you've got the skills in like particularly number theory they do a lot of with primes and stuff.
Yeah.
Or that you can Google it quickly.
Yeah, someone without the right background wouldn't know what to look up to fill in the gaps in their knowledge for a particular problem. Like they wouldn't know what technique do I need for this problem to even be able to look it up. So
Yeah.
that's hard for a lot of people. But if you come from the right background and context, then it's easier. So people run into a similar problem when they go in, like if you go into grammar and you're not as familiar with it, then you don't know that things like dependent dependency grammar tree is a good search term, for example. Like just finding that there is a
Yeah.
dependency grammar Wikipedia page is not immediately obvious to people. It's not
Yeah.
a standard term people have heard of.
I think the yeah, the only thing that I'd ever seen before in that regard was like those complex weird graphs with the things coming off them and stuff like that. I think I might have seen some of those once or twice, but I wouldn't know what to. I'd probably just Google like grammar graph. But even knowing to call it a graph is already yeah, has a lot
Yeah,
of knowledge baked in.
right. I mean, even if you type dependency grammar tree into Google, you got this as the third result, which says something about how obscure it is. If you're finding this like complicated paper thing on Stanford, as the
Yeah.
third result, it's not very mainstream. Like you're already in the obscure niche specialized search terms.
Yeah. Um yeah.
So another thing that helps is looking at the bigger picture. Want zoom in? Okay, here we go. So like bigger picture. Right, the bigger picture is what is grammar leading to? And this helps you figure out what parts of grammar do you need in order to get there, because it's not necessarily everything. If you have specific goals that you're trying to build towards, then it helps you figure out proper milestones. So
yeah, it sort of occurs to me that like as in my little tree, I've got like grammar. I mean, yeah, whatever it's under, it sort of doesn't matter. But there's like in my mind, it's not been clear enough to know when anything was done. I mean, I guess with self-directed goals, like if I was trying to do this on my own, I wouldn't know either. So, so it's sort of, I mean, I feel like it's, well, I would know only in the sense that it would just be up to me to choose when I stop doing stuff, I guess.
yeah, so it sounded like you had some fairly specific goals for writing. In particular, you were planning to do more writing in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so I really wanted to, I mean, I tried writing some stuff down, um, and rewriting some stuff that I wrote a few years ago, um, to update it. And uh, I don't know, it sort of became clear that I didn't quite uh like I wasn't particularly principled in the way that I was writing, and so if I came back to something, I would sort of want to change everything but not know why or how to do it necessarily better. It would just be a different intuition. Um, so that was sort of part of it. There was also like some implicit goals that I didn't uh necessarily know how to flesh out nearly as well. So um like there was other stuff that's not listed here particularly, in that, like, I mean, one of the sort of goals um, was to like get better at philosophy. Um,
Right.
but I don't think, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I guess there was, I felt like there was no point raising it because like that was going to be part of it anyway. We were
Uh-huh.
gonna, like, because it's just involved in everything. So uh, I guess there's sort of other stuff there as well, um, like getting faster um, at just writing things down or understanding things, um, and doing so with a low error rate, in that sort of the overall time sort of matters. Um, part of that is uh, like being more effective at like participating in FI, and that I wasn't happy with. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so there's a bunch of other stuff there, and a lot of these are like things that you can aim towards, but there's no, yeah, like it's not like high jump where once you're over it sort of thing. So in terms of
There,
like structure, sorry, go on.
there's an initial barrier to entry, and then once you're over it, you are in a state of making progress. So you've gotten past the initial obstacles and you've gotten progress actually moving along. So that is a thing you can aim at, even if, there's still problems in the future. Um, getting from I haven't started yet to I've actually gotten it working for, 2 weeks in a row, for example, is a significant step up.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that means you got past, yeah, the initial barriers to entry, and then you got something working where you're able to make progress uh, continually, or ongoing basis progress. And
um,
even if you got stuck again, that's still something because you had it working in the past. You're in a new situation than before you started.
Yep. Particularly it feels like with the grammar stuff, I feel like anything that I wanted to search for, I'd have a pretty good idea of how to research it now.
Yeah, that
Advanced
is
stuff I'm not
actually,
sure about, but yeah,
yeah, that's one of the best things to do with studying grammar. Like you don't have to learn everything or memorize it all. You want to have enough of the fundamentals to understand how things fit together and then be able to look up the details when you need them. It's similar to learning programming.
yep, yeah, that felt well, I mean, I guess a lot of uh, tertiary education or just education in general, typical education, is a bit more overbearing on how much it sort of forces you to learn.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I feel like another thing that sort of occurred to me that I'm not sure how much it relates to this, but sort of when you like get tired of a topic, um, like focusing too much on one topic can be tiring, and having different topics to spend time on is often sort of nice. Um,
Yep.
I guess particularly because like in terms of the sort of creative energy or the basket of currencies that we get, um,
Yes. They often use different ones in non-obvious ways.
yeah, even if they're both creative, it's not that there's just a creativity basket.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I feel like the grammar stuff is because it's like fairly some of the skills are like trees and stuff. I'm obviously like compared to normal people learning grammar for the first time, I've got a lot more pre-existing knowledge. Uh, but some of the like it feels more tiresome sometimes, particularly when I run into problems and I've got to think back from first principles. Like if I have already, if I've got the shortcut in my brain type thing that allows me to do it quickly, usually that's pretty good. But then um, yeah, I'll hit certain points where I've really got to think through something. Um, yeah, and I think those are fairly draining by comparison. Yeah,
Yeah, so having things not on autopilot, that's one of the goals. So learning comes primarily in steps. Learning comes in steps. One, able to do it successfully once or a few times. Two, able to do it successfully many times. Able to do it cheaply.
yeah,
So getting to each of these stages is itself a goal that you can aim for and make progress on and see when you succeed.
yeah,
So if you haven't finished stage three yet, that is something you can practice as a separate goal from the earlier goal of being able to do it at all.
yeah.
Whether
Um,
that's worth it depends on how much you're going to reuse it. So grammar stuff, you plan to write a bunch, so it seems like something you'll reuse enough that it's worth doing some actual practice. So that thinking through the first principles isn't a significant burden anymore.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think I'm in between two and three in that I don't tend to, I mean, most of the time I get things right or at least on the right track. Um, but yeah. Um, okay, so I know I've talked in the past about like a few areas that I should focus more on, and I haven't really gone and done that. So that's, I guess
Yeah,
as well.
so
Oh, yep, sorry.
remembering your goals on a daily basis or regular basis and reviewing what you're doing to accomplish them is important.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm not sure if it shows up. Like this work tracker thing with the Trello board that I've got. So just thinking about all this, so I'm not looking at this nearly as much anymore. And I feel like it's become like a lot of this is losing structure as I'm getting deeper in things. Like when it's more basic,
Yeah,
or like, yeah, whereas it sort of makes, because like a lot of this stuff is now, they're part of much bigger goals. So in terms of, there's a lot of like FI stuff here, but there's stuff like under, the choice is one. Um, I can't even remember what this article was. I think it was to do with yes, no. So there's like yes, no stuff is another thing. Um, yeah. So maybe like structuring these under larger things is one way to sort of start doing that, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming, and that it's not just a to-do list of 20 different items. It's there's only
yeah,
3 goals, but yeah, each one is
keeping them
broken down.
categorized. Also, some of those goals don't say, they're not that specific about what you're supposed to do, so they don't say how big of a project it is. Like if you're reading an article, you can read it thoroughly in detail and analyze it. You can read it at a moderate pace, or you can read it quickly. And those are all different activities that take a different level of effort. So it would help you know what you're facing if things were labeled that way. Like you could put effort estimates or some sort of indication of what the purpose is, or yeah, if you're clear on the purpose, then it helps you decide how much effort you need to put in to achieve that purpose. And for some of these things, I think just reading them quickly would help give you some extra context, and you don't have to go in detail on everything. And you could, after you've read a bunch of things quickly, you could pick one that you want to go into more detail on, now that you know what your options are more and what you think would help.
Yeah, I mean, so some of this, like, I'm just thinking about the various articles that I've got here. Um, it doesn't make like if I it doesn't make sense to by default try and read everything in, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe it does, but read everything like as deeply as some of the material we've covered. Um,
Yeah,
but I sort of uh like I guess I haven't like by default thought that I would um uh I guess, yeah, by default I've thought I would be doing that, as opposed to like read everything quickly to gain an overview of the article to figure out whether there's extra bits in there that I didn't know, or that are points I didn't realize, or things like that. Um, yeah, so it just makes more sense to do it more incrementally, as opposed to trying to, sit down and say, oh, okay, now I'm going to read and take notes on this article for every article.
yeah. Having in-depth analysis in your toolkit is really useful. Helps a lot in debates when things get hard. Helps a lot when you're trying to write something and you want particularly high quality. But you definitely don't need to do it every time. So that can be one of the things that gets in people's way, is perfectionism or completionism or whatever, as opposed to calibrating the effort to the task.
Yeah. So
And you will find that when you read quickly, you will catch a few things you didn't used to because of the in-depth practice. Your quick reading will improve too, because you're aware of more issues and you've thought them through, and some of them, now that you've thought them through, you're able to think about them more quickly than you used to be able to.
yep. So yeah, like if I was skimming, like being able to spot key things in the sentence, sort of from a structural point of view or something like that. Um, like I can see how those two things would be synergistic.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So, yeah, regarding reviewing your goals regularly, that should work unless you're conflicted, unless there are like hidden doubts about the goals you have or hidden other goals that you haven't written down or something.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I don't feel like there's like I feel like I could write down like lots of hidden goals, but many of them are just, the regular background implied goals that aren't particularly interesting. Um, but I don't think I have a problem with like being honest about my goals as such. Or at least if I do, it's much less than I would have, a month ago. Um, so I'm not like super worried about that in that when I review goals, I should be able to identify those fairly easily, I imagine. Unless I
Yeah,
don't realize at all.
yeah. So it's also important to pay attention to your emotions and motivations and things like that. Um, if a goal is actually best, you ought to be happy about that, feel good about it, feel motivated, feel interested, those kinds of things. When people are missing those things, it's a sign that something's wrong. There's something they don't like about it, or it doesn't have some stuff that they do like, and they like doing other stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Presumably it could be external stuff as well.
sure.
Um,
And yeah, this stuff doesn't have to involve dishonesty. A lot of it is just ignorance. You're a complicated system. It's hard to know everything about yourself. It's
hmm.
like you're a legacy code base that no one has maintained for a long time, and then you show up at the company and you're trying to figure out what's going on. It's hard to untangle it and understand everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess particularly because we don't know, like, we don't know what we've brought from like evolution. We don't know what ideas we generate really early in life. All that sort of jazz. We're sort of like the only explicit stuff is stuff that's recent, essentially, or like, um, yeah. There's a lot of things to figure out that aren't intuitive.
Yeah, so if you don't feel motivated, interested, etc., the default thing to do is remind yourself why you have that goal, what's good about it. Like go through your reasons, write them down, that kind of thing. Like actually examine them and try to see if are they persuading you or do you have any objections to them?
So I sometimes think about like one of the ways that when I'm not motivated about stuff that I feel like I should be, uh, that tends to like it doesn't feel like it manifests particularly well as such. Like the thought patterns, and I imagine this is fairly typical for many people, are like, uh, why, like, this X is good, but I don't want to do X. Why don't I want to do X? That's bad. I should feel bad for being bad, sort of thing.
Yeah, you
Um,
got to replace that with something more like brainstorming, like write down 20 things that might be bad about it. If you have trouble writing down things that would be why you don't like it, you could write down why an average person might not like it. What are typical reasons that a person might not like it, and typical reasons a person would like it. And if you have trouble with that, then you should probably practice brainstorming on something easier. Brainstorming is a really important skill that is a component in all sorts of philosophical things.
yeah. Um,
I
there's
was trying to
definitely
get
like,
someone to practice brainstorming on FI, and they did like I got them to do it successfully with some simple practice topic. I think it was dogs, stuff about dogs. And they came up with like 20 things on their own. They could totally brainstorm. and they were planning to do it regularly, but then they just didn't, then stopped following up.
Hmm.
But it's something, it's not something that has societal support to practice, but it's very practicable to take topics that aren't that hard and just come up with a list of things. Like you could try that right now. 20 good things about dogs.
Yep. Um, it's yeah, it's it's somewhat distracting actually because half my brain is now thinking about dogs. Um, uh, it's so it's I mean it's somewhat like it's weird in that it's brainstorming is somewhat encouraged societally, but only for certain things. Like, oh, if you have writer's block, then just, either free writing or write down 100 like article titles or what you could say about blah or things like that. Or like the
Yeah,
typical corporate meeting where everyone gets in on a whiteboard and wastes 2 hours. Um,
yeah, it's
but
not brainstorming that people have an issue with. It's practicing brainstorming. It's not seen
yeah,
as
okay.
something you
Yeah,
do like worksheets for.
yeah, yeah, that
It's
makes
seen
sense.
as unstructured.
Yeah. So I think I have ended up practicing that a bit somewhat unintentionally. Or maybe, I mean, not well, without the intent of actually, what do you call it? Like doing it for the sake of brainstorming. But like, I mean, I haven't updated or worked on this in a week plus. But yeah, like the various like article ideas or whatever for Flux stuff here, which
Yeah,
has yeah
right.
75 nodes so far.
So you can do it at least sometimes, but um, sometimes there's problems where you can only brainstorm about some topics and not others, and you get stuck in some cases. So if you practice it for a variety of things, that can help.
Yeah. Um.
Like some people can brainstorm about topics they're already good at, but they have a hard time brainstorming about topics they don't know much about.
hmm.
Like, if I told you to brainstorm 10 things about makeup, you might have a harder time than with dogs. But it should be possible to do that even without knowing much about makeup.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even I mean, one of the things like that immediately comes to mind about makeup is like face powder, foundation, etc. Like, what's the difference? What are the things and purposes? Like with media training, I was told to like go buy like if I'm going on TV, then to go buy like some face powder and stuff to use that beforehand. Like there's a bunch of things that are like I can immediately start filling that out, even though they're more questions as opposed to dogs where I might write down more assertions. But
Yeah,
questions are still good. Like, I mean, yeah,
yeah, writing down research areas is a perfectly valid way to brainstorm.
yep. So one thing, I mean, um, with regards to the like uh binging games, I haven't brainstormed it, but uh, in fact, I've never brainstormed it. Um, I've sort of just sat there and thought about it a bit, or like in the background as I'm like, clicking through a cutscene or whatever else.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Why don't you try brainstorming things people like about games? And then
Uh,
separately, things that are wrong with games or things people dislike about games.
do you mean we should do that now or do that later?
Yeah, try it. Try it right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so far I'm seeing a lot of abstract categories. There's nothing wrong with that, but try some more concrete stuff for variety.
Okay. So as in, uh,
Like it could be about a specific game if it needs to be, just like specific things like
what I'm trying to do at the moment, by the way, is thinking back to like idea trees and essentially trying to list all the broad things about like that are just the first tier categories type stuff. I don't know if these are actually more specific than some of it, but um,
yeah. So it's hard to start that way unless you know what you're doing, like you already have an organization in your mind. Um,
so
it's
uh,
often helpful to brainstorm in a less structured way, more freeform. Brainstorm things at many different conceptual levels, and then
yeah, okay.
review what you have and see what categories they can be organized into.
So not necessarily depth first, but not breadth first.
Yeah, just anything and everything can help with.
So when we say like more concrete, if I say quests, is that um, like concrete enough type thing, or what are we?
Yeah,
Um,
Quest is more concrete. You can go more concrete than that. Like you could name a specific quest in a specific game. And
um,
like you could think about a specific quest and say like something that's fun about that particular quest, like give a reason. It's easier to give reasons when you're being more concrete. Like it's easier to think of a reason that um, a particular quest in Fallout 4 was fun than it is to think about why quests are fun in general. Or it's sort of a different thing.
yeah, okay. So sort of like this, like as in uh, like the competitive stuff with leaderboards, and then there's like Hearthstone Legend rank sort of thing. You do it every month. It's a social status stuff. There's like a regular problem solving challenge. Um, like this is more what we're talking about, right?
Sure, those are some more variety of things.
Um, 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 I'm just thinking. So we were talking about like, or so yeah, the full topic is what people think is good about games. Um,
Or what they like, what they enjoy,
what
that
they
kind of
like.
stuff.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, okay. Um, Yeah, so I've put these sort of like things. They're more like tags of various stuff.
Yeah, so that's plenty.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's good things here. You can come up with a bunch of stuff. You got a bunch of ideas.
Yep.
There's some organization and categories to it, which is both good and bad. It's, organization is mostly good, but it's a little bit limiting when you think inside categories instead of thinking of anything.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I get what you mean.
Yeah. Overall, they're a little bit abstract and sophisticated, which is a good thing to be able to do. But it's only one type of thing. You're
When you
missing part of the picture of how people normally think about things. So I tried to write some that are in a bit of a different style that
Yep.
is more like how the typical person thinks about things and includes more concretes and examples. And this one is like a personal example, but it's the type of thing that other people have stories like this of their own. So it's representative.
Yeah. Yep. Um. Yep. Whereas yeah, so I'd say like under mine. I mean, just to um contrast. Where was it? There was a thing about with friends like mutual achievement. Put somewhere. Grow relationships by
Right.
mutual achievement. But yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas so that I've just lumped a
That's an
bunch of experiences under one thing.
Yeah, that's an abstract category. Whereas if you look at the concrete instances, like specific achievements that happened, specific events, yours or ones you find on Reddit or made up stories that seem realistic, all of those give you a different perspective than the abstract categories. They add something to your analysis and help you see it more thoroughly.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just thinking like under quests, like I didn't write, for example, people like completing quests, um, and they don't like, or they like the idea of not having anything be unclear. Where like yeah, you see people get frustrated as soon as like there's something that's unclear, like where do I go now, sort of thing. Um, yeah, so I don't think I've written anything in in that style, like the style that you wrote. But yeah,
Yeah, so this style it's easier to get started with, especially for things you don't know much about, because you don't yet have all the abstract categories in your head. So it helps you approach things you're not already good at, because you're just throwing out random concretes and they're disorganized, but that's easier to start with. And it helps when you're trying to rethink things that you already know about. Um, when your brainstorming is in terms of the conceptual categories that you already have, then it tends to reinforce them or lead to the conclusions that you already have.
yeah,
It's harder to change your mind when you do that kind of brainstorming. Whereas if you throw out a bunch of disorganized concretes and then you try to categorize them and organize them like fresh, then there's a chance that you will come up with different conceptual categories than the ones you already had.
yep, yep. Um, yeah, like spotting new patterns or whatever else.
Yeah,
Just thinking about it in a different way.
yeah. So it's a little like relearning the field from the beginning, partially. Gives you a chance to reconsider things.
Yeah, yep. Hmm.
Also, if you throw out a bunch of concretes first before you think about your categories, then you can go see, do they fit into my categories? Whereas if you put the categories first, then you're going to tend to generate things that do fit into them. So you're less likely to get contradictory evidence. The less abstract stuff is also useful for communicating with people because you're a much more abstract thinker than the typical person,
Yeah,
which is a problem I run into as well. And yeah, people want more examples than you tend to use, probably.
yeah. No, I tend to find examples annoying and frustrating, and when people put like important information in the discussion of an example, I think that's bad. Um, so I prefer when people give some sort of like abstract thing that I can read once and then like think about for 15 minutes, as opposed to spending 15 minutes thinking of examples.
Yeah, so
Um,
the communication problems with that go both ways. Um,
hmm,
it is harder for you to engage with and benefit from the typical knowledge in your culture because it's not structured in your preferred way.
yeah,
So having a decent familiarity and practice with other styles helps with that problem.
yeah.
There's some social pressure against it as well. It can seem childish or not sophisticated, that kind of thing.
Um, yeah, I feel like in the worst case, it's like seen as like trying to practice being manipulative, um, which is a thing that, yeah, I think people have a lot of unspoken rules about what is and isn't manipulative and what's okay and not okay to do, even though the skills might be the same for two things. Um, in that, like trying to get better at communicating with people cynically, like from a PR perspective, is like understand someone so that you can appeal to them, not necessarily rationally or with integrity, just that you can make the best appeal to them possible. That sort of thing. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that those things don't conflict as much as people sometimes claim they do. Like there are real problems there, but there are also fake problems there. And there are often opportunities to do something that's both rational and effective.
yeah, yep, yep. But yeah, definitely like um, my communication being abstract has been a yeah, pretty much a constant criticism, I think. I don't think I've
Yeah, so that makes it harder to learn philosophy stuff. Philosophy is a fairly abstract field, but if you want to have sub goals and milestones and structured progress on it, you need to find concretes and apply the philosophy. and be able to test yourself as you go along. And you can't really do that if you just stay at the abstract level. It's more testable when you apply a philosophy idea and get a concrete conclusion than it is testing it at the abstract level only.
Yeah, yeah. The way that I sort of think about that stuff is often the examples are not like example. So I guess particularly with philosophy as well, there's a few times where I've tried to apply things from like BOI, like uh the moral imperative stuff or stuff like that, with real world situations, and then later realize that I've like done it backwards, or like I've misinterpreted it. So I often think about examples more as like your abstract stuff is your principles, and then the examples are like how do we apply the principles. Um, but then that topic is slightly different, like that's analysis of X using theory Y as opposed to theory Y. Um, yeah, I'm also like much more ready to deal with an abstract example. So like what happens when two people are disagreeing about something, as opposed to like what happens when, you know, a husband and wife are arguing about what school to send their kid to.
Right. The concrete example is easier to come up with and ideas about what to do about it. And then
Yeah,
once you do, say, 5 concrete examples, that helps you generalize a more generic problem-solving method that actually worked in those 5 cases, which helps connect it to reality and make it not just ivory tower crap.
yeah, yep. Um, and so just thinking about it, I think I do this a reasonable amount in my own head. Um, when I'm like thinking through an idea, like, uh, is this type of democracy better than this type of democracy comes to mind. Um, and I mean, I guess you can call them sort of like thought experiments, right? Um, in that, what happens if we put this stuff in there? But then I don't usually record that. And I'm not even sure if I, do due diligence to the idea itself half the time now. As in, within the last month, I've learned enough that I feel like I question some of the stuff that I've been doing in the past. Um, I wasn't thorough enough. But yeah, but I don't write those down, and they don't form part of the thing. I just sum everything up into the abstract representation, and then try and communicate that. Um, and only sometimes come back to the examples that I used in my own head to come up with the abstract thing. Um, I mean, I feel like that process of coming up with concrete stuff and then making it easier to generalize, we often do, uh, like when we're coming up with an idea, um, we or at least my impression is our whatever's going on in our brains will compare stuff to like abstract knowledge we already have, but also to a whole bunch of like examples or experiences that we've had to see if there's like a contradiction there. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
a
I
lot
feel,
of times people run stuff through their own experiences, but then other people have a different perspective, so they don't come to the same conclusions or agree with the general principle or whatever. But also, a lot of times people they forget about lots of counterexamples that they absolutely have experience with and could easily remember.
yeah. Um, you think that's because they're like,
A
uh,
lot of it is looking for confirming instances instead of counterexamples, I think, like
yeah.
not
So that's
enough thinking critically and the wrong thought processes.
okay. Yeah. So I saw you posted a thing or this
Yeah,
PDF to tutoring.
yeah, I was going to suggest looking at that. So this is a big project planning example. You read Fountainhead, right?
Yeah,
Okay, good, because that it's not like necessary context, but
it
it's
helps.
related. So the idea of this document was to sketch out, to some extent, how you can do project planning for a large project in advance when you don't know all about it. Like, I don't know a lot about architecture, but I was able to make a tree anyway. So if you can come up with anything kind of similar to this for your philosophy goals, that could help organize what you're doing. So I thought it might provide some inspiration for connecting like bigger picture goals to more concrete steps and how to break them down.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I can see like, so I guess it's meant to be written red, left to right, top to bottom, essentially, right? Starting with the text box.
Yeah, there's a big box, and then there's 3 different trees: pre-project, post-project, and project itself.
Yeah, okay. So the project is planning, like the project is the planning the project in the bottom thing. Is that right? Um,
Yeah, here's the main project is I want to build a skyscraper like hardware.
yeah. Oh yeah, so sorry. Just to be more clear. So the pre-project thing here is is planning the project of planning this project down the bottom. Um,
Yeah,
Sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. And then the project down the bottom is actually planning the project itself. Um,
yes, this is planning an actual concrete project, and this one is related to um, making the project plan.
yep.
It's a
And what to do before or after.
precursor.
Yep. I'm just gonna go to the bathroom quickly, by the way. Okay, back.
Yeah, so we don't need to review this in detail. You can look at it later and see if it's helpful. But one of the goals was to not overreach while dealing with something I didn't know much about. Because I've told people you can approach something um, within the limits of your knowledge, even if those are kind of low,
Yep.
and
Um,
get started on it.
that sort of makes sense in that if you couldn't do that, then it sort of feels like it would be impossible for anyone to do anything because we always start from
Yeah,
somewhere. Like a 5-year-old needs to be able to make progress, sort of thing.
yep,
So it must be possible to,
yeah. It comes up a
whereas,
lot because people say they can't talk about X topic because it would be overreaching. But overreaching is about the methods you use to approach a topic, not really about the topic itself.
yeah. So one of the things that, like, if I wanted to build a skyscraper, um, one of the first things I might do is go, like, figure out a CAD or some sort of software like that to use, and then, like Google Sketch was, I think it was called, was really good back in the day. But I've used like Fusion 360 once before, so I'd like go download that again, and then like start building something or whatever. I think a lot of people have that approach to stuff, is sort of finding problems via exploration as opposed to actually trying to figure out what problems you're going to run into in advance. And if, yeah, validate the problems really exist and then try and solve the problems before you get to them. Like, what do you need to do in a building? Like, what structures do you need on the inside of stuff? Whereas if you go straight to just drawing it, which might be good for inspiration or things like that, but it's
Yeah, there's different ways to jump into a CAD program. You can like actually think I'm now designing my building, or you can think I'm just screwing around to see what designing a building is like. And exploration versus actually trying to complete a goal are different activities.
yeah, I think people confuse the two a bit, and then like will
Yeah, it's often
yeah
unlabeled, and they often don't want to label it. They don't want to commit themselves. They want to sort of, if they succeed, they'll say they were trying to succeed. And if they fail, they'll say it was exploration and practice.
yeah.
It's a way of hedging their bets.
Um, the thing is though, you can always just do exploration, and then if you find out that it's easier than you thought or something like that, you can just add the other goal. Um,
Yeah, they don't want to admit weakness and that they can't already do it unless they have to.
yeah,
I think.
um, yeah, which is, I mean, so there's, I guess there's a general question that comes up occasionally, or it feels like it's in the background a lot. It's like you said just then, they don't want to admit weakness. Now, uh, I'd argue, and I think you probably agree, that like knowing what your limits are and things and trying to work within them so that you're more effective is not a weakness, but that it's perceived as a weakness by people. Um, and so, yeah, the background question is sort of like when, like including the context of the person that you're talking about or things like that, even though just an abstract person in speech. Or like when we're sort of like when you said that, or if I'm writing something down, um, I'm sometimes I'm uncertain about how to whether I should like make all that explicit or I don't know. I'm not sure if you see sort of what I'm trying to get at. It's not clear in my mind. Maybe we should come back to it
Uh,
later.
yeah, I'm not really sure.
All right, I'll try
But
and make that clear. Yep.
about it being perceived as weakness to understand your limits and work within them. It partly depends on the type of limit, like if it's a fundamental limit versus a I haven't learned this yet type of limit. And it depends on if you haven't learned something yet, it depends on the type of thing. Like, were you supposed to learn it in high school, or is it a specialized thing that, most adults don't know and you're allowed to learn as an adult? But it also depends a lot on presentation and do you present it as weakness or do you present it in a positive way that you're dealing with life in a reasonable way? Do you present it in a defensive context where you're worried what they're going to think and then you give them signals of weakness subtly along with
Mm.
the content? Or do you have confidence and just act like it's completely fine? And if you do, then your nonverbal signals and like minor wording details and between the line stuff might convey that it's not weakness and you might get treated that way.
Yeah. So, like just thinking in the context of grammar, um, I don't feel like I've had any bad reactions to when I tell people like that we spent a bunch of time in the early stuff on grammar. Um, but I'm just trying to reflect on those times. I think one of them is like having a bigger goal as part of it. So saying that I want to get better at my writing is an acceptable goal. Um,
Yeah.
and then saying, oh yeah, so we spent like time going over grammar. I also don't go into details about that, like so people can fill in the gaps with whatever they want there, and they might have entirely different ideas, which probably means that they're filling in the gaps somewhere at the limit of their knowledge. So from everyone's perspective, it looks like I'm doing something worthwhile because of sort of that assumption of filling in.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
pretty common with people who are friendly, whereas as
yeah,
opposed to people who are out to get you.
Hmm. Yes, yeah. Obviously, I've been spending time talking with more friendly people. Yeah, but I guess also then, yeah, I don't think my body language has been like some years ago I became really conscious. Like I suddenly realized that I didn't like shopping for clothes because I felt shame when I was in a clothes store. Um, and I didn't really know why. But knowing that, from that point on, like I essentially just did like immersion therapy on myself to like get comfortable with it. Um, I think people often, with something like if it was grammar, they would often like feel embarrassed themselves. And so if you feel embarrassed about it, then, and that's like I didn't, particularly in the times where I've been talking to people. And so, yeah, that comes off in body language and whatever else. Um, that's probably a big part of it, as opposed to like, oh, I have to go back and fix something because I didn't learn it in high school. As like, yeah, basic maths or
Yeah.
English is often seen.
Okay, so backing up a bit, it's pretty important in general to be able to operate when you're not at your best, when you're tired, when circumstances are not ideal.
Hmm.
And there's a common thing people do with philosophy and some other things where they they think they have to be at their best in order to do it because it's hard or whatever.
Yep.
This comes up with writing fairly often. People are like, "Oh, well, the circumstances aren't quite right, so I can't write right now. I'll have to do it later." And too much of your life is not optimal circumstances. Like maybe you got 2 hours of I'm at my best per day on average. It's not that much of your time overall. And for some people, it's less than that. Some people like don't even get it on most days.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, there's lots of stuff that they can. Well, I mean, I find at least when like if I'm, really motivated to go work on a particular problem or stuff, a lot of that time is not the the best energy. It's not like I have more capability than I'm using at most of the points during that because I'm doing all this other stuff that I could have done without much thinking. Um, or at least at a low enough error rate that it would be much quicker to fix it up at those points than to do it from scratch. Um, like there's lots of boring bits of code that you could do when you're tired. In fact, I've done
Yeah.
lots and lots of coding when I'm tired.
Yeah, there's definitely room to organize things and have a variety of activities. If you have activities with a distribution of difficulty, then you can correspond them to different times of day and so on. However, some people they try to do that and then they have a chronic problem where the hardest activities keep not getting done because they don't have enough at their best time. So
Yeah, yeah,
it is important to learn how to tackle some of the harder things while not being at your best and be okay with that and do it anyways.
yeah,
So one of the ways you can do that is you can go a little bit slower than you think you should be able to.
yep,
And you can go in a more methodical way. You can be more explicit. You can write down more steps. Those kinds of things all help. Like if you're not focusing fully. Um, yeah, that's a very common issue. Is people feel like when they're at their best, they can focus, they can remember everything they're doing, they can keep it all in their head. And that makes it easier to make
mm,
progress. But most of the time, they can't focus quite that well, and that prevents them from making progress. And what they need to do is adapt by taking more notes, reviewing their notes more often, and steps like that, mental thinking aids.
yep,
And they will not get things done at quite the same rate when they're not at their best, but they will still be able to get hard things done.
yes, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So one thing that occurs to me just by chance. So I had this experience a bit with like the thing that I sent you this morning. Like where we've got the tail end of the snippet at the top. I was going to ask whether there was any point talking about any of that, by the way. But if you notice the
Yep.
stuff that I sent originally, so I mean this was like just after I'd woken up. Essentially, I'd been and I probably spent, I don't know, 15 or more minutes writing that. And I like wrote out a first thing, and it was like a mess of grammar and stuff. Um, there was lots of stuff. Oh, there was also there was a lot of like typical social dishonesty stuff that I was like unhappy with. So saying like, I don't want to spend your time, like things like that. Like when people end the phone
Yeah.
call with like, I'm going to let you go, which unless I've mentioned that I'm under time pressure doesn't make sense. It does make sense if I've mentioned that, but yeah, and so there was like, it was all in one block. The grammar wasn't good. I like changed subjects and sentences type thing, that sort of nonsense. Um, and there was this other social stuff. So I spent like time like breaking that down as much as I could and writing out each individual thing. Um, and it was like I feel like I could do a much better job now. Um, but I feel like it was adequate, but only because I took like a really methodical um, sort of approach. I still wasn't like, you know, particularly happy with it, but I thought it was good enough um, for the purposes
Yeah.
of the time.
Yeah. Another one when you're not at your best. Fewer shortcuts, skipping fewer steps. Like use complete sentences, fewer pronouns. You can make things easier on yourself that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is important to have methods of proceeding that are effective when you're not at your best. If you can only do something when you're at your best, then you don't have excess capacity
Mm.
and variance screws you over. Like, if you have enough excess capacity that you can do it at your best despite variance, then you should be able to do it when you're not at your best, as long as you don't get negative variance. Like if you're not at your best and then also there's some sort of negative variance that comes along that's like, uncommon, then you can be
Um,
like, okay, next time.
just wait, negative variance, were you saying?
Yeah, so there are fluctuations when you're trying to do a project. Like sometimes things go wrong.
Do we mean variance in like a statistical sense or in a categories
Yes.
variety sense? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, statistics. Like gold rat stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, so if you're not at your best and then you also experience some other sort of like significant negative variance, like your dog died that day,
Okay, yep.
then it makes sense that the two things combine and you don't do the hard thing today, and that's fine, as long as the negative variance is uncommon.
But if it's a recurring thing, then obviously that points to a problem that's like constant overhead you need to solve.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas when you're at your best, you should be able to do something with quite a bit of resilience or robustness, um, or it's not really within your capabilities. And then that implies if you're robust at your best, then you should at least be able to do it less robustly when you're not at your best.
Yep.
So, yeah, the thing that should happen when you're not at your best is basically that you're more fragile, but by default, you should still be able to do stuff. It's
Yeah.
just more likely that something goes wrong and you end up not succeeding.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. I mean, it mirrors my um, experience as well.
Yeah, so if you find that you can't do stuff when you're not at your best, then it's too hard in some way, and you need to break down the problem and make it easier for yourself. You need to change your methods or your goals into smaller sub-goals or something until it's not as daunting. Like figure out more skills. What you can brainstorm, what skills could I improve that would make this easier?
Yep.
And then start working on some of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm just thinking if we should like bring this back to what do you call it, like my problem at hand as such, and figure out. So one thing that I definitely notice is that um, like when I stop doing, like I can't really take a break to do something I would do in downtime, like during the day. If I do that, like then I just never go back to the other thing. Um,
Is the other
I don't
thing
know.
philosophy stuff?
Yeah, it could also be just normal work. Like if I'm just, you know, doing coding or something, and then I like go off and start doing something that I would do during downtime. It's different if I like go for a walk and like grab a bagel and not
Okay,
we have bagels here. Um,
so
yeah.
you mainly have one productive session per day, and then once that ends, you're kind of done for the day. Is that it?
Pretty much. There's like some subtleties, but yeah, but that's a good generalization. So this like our tutorial. So this session happens like 12 to 2 to me for me, which is um I guess a pretty decent time. I mean, some days I'm like up at 6 a.m. and other days like today it was after 10. Um,
Right.
uh, but typically it's like I can always fit this in the productive part of the day. Um, uh, but yeah, but like sometimes I'll like if I don't do something afterwards, if I don't like go on to either review some of the stuff we were doing or go back to doing something on my list or whatever else, then then I typically don't do it later at night. Like sometimes I do, but it's the stuff later at night is a lot like it's the stuff that I can do that's easier. So like when I was going through some of the yes no videos, for example, um or the journaling stuff or things like that. Um
Yeah, so I think this relates to what we talked about last time. You need to look for evidence and details to help you figure out how much of this is from being tired and running out of resources, and how much of this is from liking the other things. Like once you start doing the fun, easier things, then you just don't want to stop because you're having a better time.
yeah. Um so I can brainstorm on both of those. Um
Right. And we talked about some specific things to look for to help differentiate burnout. So
yeah,
I think you took some notes on that.
yeah, I did. I'm pretty sure there was a thing where's yeah, burnout testable. Um so one thing that I yeah, definitely don't do is napping in the middle of the day. Um just because I feel like I I feel groggy after sleeping usually, and sometimes it takes me like, an hour and a half or 2 hours to feel like I'm running at full speed. So I tend to find napping to be like a big disruption, usually when I've done it. I can wake up later, but usually it's a few hours, and then it's like waking up at like 5 p.m. or something. Um, it doesn't seem to gel well with a lot of other stuff. But yeah. Anyway, that's just one
Yeah.
aspect of it.
I would
I think.
suggest sleep monitoring for how many hours you sleep. You could use a phone app or a watch app or just a spreadsheet or something.
Yeah, I
And
actually have like I bought like a little Fitbitty type thing. It's much cheaper. Anyway, it's meant to have sleep monitoring, and it just says, oh no, actually, sorry, it does. Um, but I might be able to tell you, for example, I've been wearing it pretty constantly for. I'm not sure if before we started this or around that time, but
uh-huh.
I have a lot of historical data. Particularly, I get to take my heart rate like every 10 minutes. Um, so which is part of the sleep tracking thing. So like I
Yeah,
think the night before last was 6.5 hours.
I think the amount of sleep you need depends on how much intellectual energy you're expending. And so if you're trying to do philosophy, you should expect to need above average sleep, both compared to your history and also the population in general.
I did find like there were a few nights where I slept for like 12 hours type thing, which sort of I feel like I mean the general idea that gets thrown around is that like physical exhaustion leads to longer sleep, um, and then we just hand wave on, oh, there's some stuff that happens with the brain that we need. Um,
Yeah, I think sleeping 12 hours if you weren't like physically exhausted is a sign of being overly tired mentally and not getting enough sleep.
yeah, I don't know how long it takes to sort of like recover from sleep deprivation either. Um, or like is in there's that idea of like a sleep bank or whatever it's called, um,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, which is obviously not exactly what happens, but at least somewhat similar. But um, you know, being sleep deprived 10 years ago and then getting 8 hours of sleep every night for the next 10 years, presuming that was, on average what you needed or whatever, doesn't mean there's still some hangover from 10 years ago. So I don't know
Yeah, yeah.
particularly how to gauge myself. Also, because there's so many outside effects on my sleep cycle, I don't know what to actually use as a baseline.
Yeah, as a first approximation, I would suggest aiming for 8.5 hours of sleep and trying to make it more consistent for both duration and timing.
Yep. Consistency is definitely like, um, yeah, a really helpful thing. Yep. So, I mean, that's, yeah, the past few days, half week or whatever, or week has been much worse sleep-wise. I did sort of
Yeah,
like make a point to let myself sleep more. But I sort of find that I then get sort of annoyed with sleeping more. Um, yeah, it
um,
doesn't feel like valuable time, I guess.
I think it is valuable because it helps enable you to be productive more.
Yep,
Whereas if you sleep less, then you're going to spend more of the day feeling too tired to do anything very good. Also, the more you sleep, the more it will take away any excuses, which is also invaluable. It helps clarify because when there are multiple possibilities about what the problem is, you're a more ambiguous situation. Whereas if you make sure that you sleep enough for the next 2 weeks every day, then you're going to have a clearer situation if you still have problems, or maybe that solved your problems. You'll see. So you
yep,
get better experimental data that way.
yep. Yeah.
These
Um,
these things are usually rarely entirely sleep or tiredness or that kind of thing. Like sometimes they're half that, but it's usually not the whole issue. Part
yep,
of that is because often there's motivation issues or something else that cause the sleep cycle in the first place,
yep.
right?
As in
The
like
sleep
wanting to
cycles,
stay up to play more games. Um,
yeah, it's often happening for a reason related to priorities and choices and so on.
yep, yep. That makes sense.
So, so it's definitely important also to look at it from the angle of trying to figure out which activities you're finding the most value in, why you're finding value in them, and um, what stuff you think is valuable but you're not fully convinced, and looking into it more thoroughly and things like that.
Yep. Um, Today's not a bad example of that, where I was sort of like, when I sent the thing this morning, I was sort of worried that we'd end up covering the same stuff or something. Um, but we didn't, and it's, yeah, still useful. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of problems are hard, but you just have to keep trying things. They do have to be different things, yeah, but if you just keep working on them, um, even if it's not obvious that you're making progress, if you just keep trying different things, eventually something usually helps, at least a little bit.
yeah.
It's the same with
Well,
like writing something that's hard to write. and you just keep writing different drafts until you come up with some ideas that get you somewhere, and then it starts getting easier.
I think, yeah, negative results feel like in the same way that when someone has an idea and does an experiment and writes a paper, if the paper is just we tried a thing and it didn't work, um, like people don't like that sort of, they don't feel a sense of achievement the same way. But you are at least
Yeah,
eliminating possibilities if you do it rigorously.
yeah. I think with philosophy, it's important to have a proper perspective. So philosophy is hard. Most people utterly fail at it. It's a heroic thing. The world desperately needs it. Um, you're in a tough situation with your childhood and your schooling and so on. These things make it hard. You have obligations and commitments, not helping. You're not independently wealthy, not helping. Um, so if you're making progress in doing things, you should see that positively. It is an accomplishment that most people are not accomplishing or being effective at. If you just keep working on it, those are the appropriate steps to take to make progress. You should be happy about that. You should think you're doing something actually worthwhile, and doing sort of anything you can to make that actually happen is something you should be proud of. Like if you sleep more to increase the chances that you have success at rational thinking, that was a good try. That was worthwhile,
Yep.
whether
Well,
it
I
works
mean,
or not.
so just to like I can't remember if it was I think it was the end of the first week when we did the first Zaz paragraph that I really
Uh-huh.
struggled with. But like that was oh no, I think maybe it was the end of the second week. Anyway, whenever it was like a big like that was what got me to fix my sleeping stuff. I was really bad at it before that. Yeah. Um, can't remember why I raised that, but yeah,
Yeah, so when you're trying to get out of a hole like the situation society puts people in, progress is going to look small at first. Not everything's going to work, but it snowballs. The more progress you make, the easier it gets to make progress.
yep,
There are some limits, like when you start hitting the cutting edge of a field, then it gets harder because you have to mode switch into doing pioneering research. But that's a good problem to have.
yep. I mean, pioneering research is the same sort of thing, though. Like in the sense that progress when you're not pioneering is uh, like if you imagine that as an exponential type curve, when you start doing pioneering stuff, it's the same sort of curve, um, just in a different size. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Also, it's not fundamentally different to do pioneering. Um, the fundamental epistemology of learning is the same thing. The idea was
yeah,
not in your mind. You had to conjecture it. You had to do critical thinking. There's always fundamentally like you're doing some proper learning if you learn it, even if other people already knew it. Um, so it's a nice aid when people give you a bunch of hints, but it is not a really deeply fundamental difference.
One thing that I did think about the other day was like uh, so the magnitude of eureka moments, like as in sometimes I get them when learning stuff. Usually that's associated with following like my own ideas down some chain or like if you like particularly thinking about maths, like having some really hard problem and having to like recognize some elegance that was not you weren't told in advance. Um, and yeah, and so that's similar when like coming up or in magnitude to like coming up with your own ideas. But then we don't like, or at least my experience is that I like definitely don't feel that as much when I start to get the idea of like actually no, even then I do sometimes like thinking about uh the first time I read the multiverse chapter of BOI, I finished it like early one morning and then went to go get coffee. And like the barista was doing a physics degree or something and I couldn't stop like babbling about um how amazing this thing was. Anyway, so sorry, that's off tangent. I guess the idea was roughly that people are like eureka moments are smaller when you're learning stuff, when you get lots of hints, I guess. But maybe that's because you don't come up with as good ideas, like are people lazier when doing that? Anyway, that all might be off topic, but
Eureka moments, I would think, would partly relate to your incrementalism. How much are you breaking things down into little steps? So they're, to some extent, a sign of overreaching, trying to do big jumps at once instead of finding easy routes. Because if you find a bunch of little steps and you get to the same result, there's no eureka moment. It doesn't have an impressive
mm.
jump. You're like, oh, well, that wasn't that hard. I just did X and then Y and then Z and then so on. But doing it step by step is actually a way to be productive that's just as good, or overall generally better than trying to do big jumps.
So just thinking about that, I think you can have big eureka moments without necessarily overreaching, but you can't predict how to do them, would be my guess. So the example is like, um, I mean, whether I'm right or wrong about IBDD, like issue-based direct democracy, is sort of besides the point. But the feeling of it was like a really big one because not because I was like discovering a whole bunch of knowledge all at once. Like I'd been studying like ideas from economics for like a few years casually, and had all
Mm-hmm.
these ideas over here from existing democratic systems or things. And then there was like it was just realizing like a fundamental assumption being wrong, and then like a big like switch or reorganization in like a knowledge graph sort of thing. So there wasn't
Yeah,
like a lot
yeah,
of nodes that were made. It was just like a big switch over to different stuff. I can see how
yeah.
with
That
that,
can happen
yeah,
when you find something with implications and then you start working through the implications, so it makes a big difference in a short time period.
um, yeah, you can only rapidly explore them if you already know a lot about that new arm or area or whatever else. But yeah, I think in general it's probably not possible to figure out or to predict where you should study to find that. So thinking about things like Newtonian dynamics and general relativity as well as like you don't really know where to start, even if you were really good at all the math side. Um, and for some reason you'd been doing, you know, weird, twisted four-dimensional uh, geometry stuff. Coming up with the idea, you wouldn't be able to predict that that's where you needed to look without already having come up with the idea. But yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is you mentioned earlier that you had around 2 months and then you're going to be busier. So
yep.
I think it's important to keep that in mind for your motivation and stuff, that
Mm.
you're trying to do a hard thing, you have a time limit, you have a budget, and whatever you can do to maximize that, or make it work better, is important, because you're up against static
Oh,
memes,
oh
the
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of, you're up against a culture that does not put out very many rational thinkers.
Yeah. Yep. Um, yeah. So with regards to that, I should have like 4 weeks notice or slightly less. Um,
Oh,
maybe.
you're going to get notice at some point. I see.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I was a little uncertain with the original stuff. I think I gave you a range. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like so. I mean, it turns out that it'll be like I guess at least 2 months, given that
Okay.
I think we're 4 weeks in now. It'd be 4 weeks in one day. It was Tuesday the 23rd or something we started, or 24th.
I don't know. But
Yep.
yeah, regardless of the specific amount of time, there will be an end point where you're busier, and the time window will be fairly short in the context of a life
Yes. Yeah.
or a career.
I mean, it's fairly short in the context of a year, let alone. Um, yeah. I think one of the things that I should do is reevaluate my, like, break down my goals again, go through like what I sort of want, try and actually get that perspective and bigger picture and contextualize it in time as well, because the previous stuff wasn't contextualized in time. I've made like a note here about like reminding myself about um, like some of the ideas I've had. I think it's easy to have like to know things intellectually, but then not like integrate them into your background thinking, I guess. Um,
Yeah, it can help to compare to model projects like being an astronaut and going to the moon, or being one of the people who builds the spaceship, or a journey to Antarctica. Like things that are obviously hard and impressive and heroic and so on. And yeah, you can make comparisons to those things. Like if you were an astronaut and sleeping 10 hours a day helped you a little bit, you wouldn't feel bad about that. You wouldn't be
mm,
annoyed about that. You would say, "Oh, I found something that helps. This is great. It's totally worth the resources because we're aiming for a big result here. We don't want to cut any corners even a little bit. So it totally makes sense to do that." Whereas if you find, like regret spending all that time sleeping, that shows like a significantly different perspective.
yeah, yeah. I don't really at the moment or anymore, but I have like in recent history, like really disliked the idea of sleeping and sort of avoided it so that I get more hours in the day type thing. Um,
For
but
what
yeah,
it's worth, that is not an attitude I share.
yeah. Um, well, I don't think I share it either now, or maybe that was just a reflection on what I thought about the work I was doing. Um,
Yeah, I
anyway,
regard sleeping in general as an more efficient than typical tool for replenishing resources. Like it's better than most alternatives for resource replenishment.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
generally have a positive opinion.
that makes sense. Um, yeah, okay. So revisiting some of those things that I just mentioned, brainstorming about good and bad things, about the various like issues or topics or things. Okay, like I mean, I don't think I'm gonna end up looking through any more. I mean, I didn't look through any of the grammar material in the past 2 days.
Okay, yeah, get to what you can. It's it's up to you. Good luck.
Cool. All right. Thanks. Talk to you again in 2 days.
Yep, bye.
Cheers.